Rami is the new comedy series by Ramy Youssef, who also stars in the show as the title character, a regular, everyday American guy that just happens to also be a devout Muslim. I'm Rob Licuria, senior editor here at Gold Derby, with the show's co-creator and star Ramy Youssef. Rami, the show breaks some ground because it centers around an American Muslim, and that's the premise of the show. But is it fair to say that it goes way beyond that by exploring a lot of the stuff that all people in their 20s and 30s come up against?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that. I mean, we look at an Arab Muslim family, and we try to explore humanizing them, and obviously the title character of my character of Rami. But I think what we're really looking at is someone who is trying to be a higher version of themselves. He's trying to figure out his purpose. He's trying to figure out where he fits in, and that is spiritually, it's career-wise, it's romantically, but he's trying to strive for where he thinks he should be. And a big part of that is his faith. A big part of that is him being Muslim. And so I think what's a little different here is we're seeing his faith and his culture be something that's aspirational for him. I think a lot of stories kind of involve someone trying to erase their faith or step away from it. And a lot of first generation immigrant stories, you kind of see the kid basically kind of like really upset and then kind of have a blow up with his parents and say, I want to be white. That's kind of the essence of what a lot of the stories that I had seen looked like. And I wanted to make something where the struggle was internal. He actually sees the positivity of his culture and his faith, but he also is in the current moment with his desires and his ego, and you see that pull between where he comes from, between being just a 20-something guy in New Jersey and New York, and what those pulls look like. And I think because we made the struggle internal, because he wasn't just blaming his family and he wasn't just blaming people around him, he's really actually looking at personal responsibility. I don't really think there's anything more universal than personal responsibility. And I feel like that's why it's been really exciting to see how it's resonated with so many people. It wasn't what I expected, but it's just been really cool that anyone who's a person of faith, I mean, I got an email from a man who said, I'm an evangelical Christian father of 3 and I am Rami. And just from watching the story from Jewish people who, I mean, there was a really nice thing from this guy who writes at the Times in Israel, and the headline was like, every Jew needs to watch Rami. And I couldn't really believe it, because I think it's hitting people of a lot of faiths, but I think it's also just, again, hitting anyone who wants to be their higher self, right? Like we see my character deal with Ramadan, where he starts off really wanting to do it right, and then he kind of falls and fails. And I think that's anybody. That you don't have to. That's not just religion. That's you wake up and do a 6 a.m. yoga class, and then at midnight you're at McDonald's with a milkshake and large fries, and you're not who you thought you were in the morning. And so exploring those things are what I think is really exciting, because I think that hits with a lot of people emotionally and what they're going through.
It really does. And I think a lot of people have maybe their own in for this show. As you've said, evangelicals and people of the Jewish faith are really into it. I'm a first generation, Australian from an immigrant family. So that was my in, for example. But there's so many other things about the show that I found extremely relatable, but unexpectedly so, while you're also trying to paint something quite authentically, because I did feel that it came across to me very authentically. And I wonder, how particularly challenging is it for you to remain very authentic to the cultural background that you're portraying, but also make it relatable to everybody?
Yeah, I think it's so much about it is the specifics, and making sure that for me, I wanted it to feel like Arab Muslim families that I knew, growing up, and really trying to get all those details down. And sometimes if you're just focusing on the food that's on the table, even if you don't get a shot of it with the camera, just knowing that it's there is really, it sets the whole scene for the level of detail. I mean, we have had, our amazing cinematographer, Adrian, our amazing production designer, Grace Yoon. These are people who we looked through so many different houses and families, and making sure that everything in there, when you stepped in there, emotionally felt right. And then you add another layer where you're casting actors who speak Arabic, you know, not people who just look it, but people who actually do. And then getting even more granular than that, where it says, okay, cool, but like we need to make sure not just is this Arabic, but is it the right dialect of Arabic, you know? And so through the casting was really interesting because that influenced the character choices, where we started off saying, okay, this is an Egyptian family. And so we cast a father who speaks Egyptian Arabic, but we cast a mother who speaks Palestinian Arabic. So now my character is half Egyptian, half Palestinian. You know, there's no reason to try and make that fly when it's not what it is. And so it was really using the cast, using, you know, our locations, using every aspect of what lives and breathes on screen to inform the facts of the world so that we're not trying to fabricate anything. And I think when that's what's happening under the hood on our end, it just becomes part of, you know, the performances feeling alive and feeling real and feeling grounded. And you know, again, that comes from the casting of people for the cultural accuracy, but also emotional accuracy. You know, like my best friend, Steve, who plays in the show, my friend with muscular dystrophy, is also one of my real best friends since third grade. You know, Mo and Ahmed, who play my two Muslim buddies, are both people who not only have I toured doing stand-up with for the last 6-7 years, but who we've all lived together at different points of our lives. So there's so many things that are just grounded in reality. So I feel like that ends up really living and breathing on screen in a way that, again, I couldn't have really anticipated, but it was really cool seeing that come to life.
And the show often subverts expectations. There are certain cliches or stereotypes that we generally expect to see in a show about a Muslim American family, and you just tend to smash them every episode. And for example, you put your own spin on dating and relationships. So Rami goes on a date with a Muslim woman. He expects to be demure, but she's extremely kinky. That made me laugh out loud really hard. And then later in the season, the guy dating Rami's sister is really turned on by her ethnicity and her difference. Both scenes completely subvert expectations from a completely opposite point of view. That's actually really tough to do properly, and I think you kind of stuck the landing. What's it like to set out to do something like that and actually do it successfully?
You know, it was, you know, with the date that I go on, something that was, again, really interesting for me to explore is how do we stereotype ourselves? You know, I think there's so much dialogue around the hate coming towards our communities and towards our faith. And I think that that's what dominates headlines. But for me to make a show, my job is not really to reflect the headlines that we already know exist. It's to show what's under the hood that you don't know. And so for us, a lot of the things that we choose to explore are things that you wouldn't have heard about. And so I think there's this expectation of, okay, this is a show about an Arab Muslim family in, you know, New Jersey and in the United States. And man, I can't wait to see them talk about the Muslim ban and Trump and all the politics and all of that. And we pretty much wholly avoid that, not to be apolitical, but because that's already what people know coming in. And so for us to spend too much time on that would actually be in and of itself kind of ignorant, because then we're saying, well, everything you've heard is the only thing there is to hear, right? It would kind of defeat showing our humanity. And so the storyline seems subversive, but it's really just because they're not the headlines that you read. And so we have these ideas about maybe how a date would go or how something might happen sexually between two Muslim people. And then we see it play out in a way where my character is actually at fault. You know, not only are there all these political things happening and all these other aspects that affect his life, but even within his own life and his own circle, he has his own prejudices and he has his own ways of dealing with things. And the same thing happens on the date that my sister character goes on, where the hurdle she thinks she's going to face, which is this hurdle from, you know, her family and this hurdle from her culture in expressing herself sexually, it actually ends up being from the partner that she thought she would find refuge in to explore her sexuality. She actually finds the most, you know, prejudice and the most, you know, acknowledgement of her, you know, her culture in a way that holds her back in a way that she didn't think she would get from that character. And so I think that's, you know, with both those scenes and with a lot of the things that we explore, they're the things that are emotionally happening under the hood that we don't get to hear about.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. And even though you say that the show doesn't really get political, and it doesn't, there is a mention of the Muslim ban. There is a mention of certain things, which is kind of, again, quite authentic. This is the stuff that affects people from the Muslim community, but it doesn't inform your every single day. And so that's what made it, to me, really authentic. We go back to Rami's childhood. It shifts between a meditation on jerking off, and then it talks about how profoundly 9/11 affected Muslim communities. So you did get to go to that stuff a little. And what was that like, to at least shine a bit of a spotlight on how that has affected Muslim communities?
Yeah, I mean, that episode with a young Rami in middle school really focuses initially on his, challenges with puberty and the feeling of being an outsider, not only culturally, but just on a level of not understanding things that your friends understand, which I think can happen to a lot of kids. But then there's also this additional layer of immigrant kids who face that, and kids who, feel out of the loop. And a lot of the times, your family's dealing with restarting and starting a whole new life in a different culture. There's not always the nuance of a sex talk, in the way that, it might be for other families. And so we see him dealing with that, and it's really difficult. And that in and of itself is causing him anxiety that is on a personal 9/11 level. And then 9/11 happens, and then we see the way that the community, and again, with this character and with this show, it's not just things coming from the community, it's seeing his own fear of himself and how that complicates everything that he feels about himself, about his identity, and about where he comes from, and what his family believes. And so you feel a little bit of the push from those around him, but he already went there on his own in his mind, and that was something that was always, for me, I felt missing from the conversation. We have this, obviously, 9/11's, for me and for many of us here, the most horrific thing we've seen happen in our lives. And we've heard about it from really, a couple of angles, but never, to me, have we heard about it from the perspective of a child, and then a Muslim child, and how that affects the psychology of how you grow, and how that shapes, who you are. And so to use that as a starting point, with just a very human, puberty experience, and seeing how something political can further complicate that. That to me was the way we wanted to talk about it on the show, and it's really the only episode that we, in the first season, discuss terrorism, and again, like you said, yeah, there's a line here about the Muslim ban. I think there's one or two lines about Trump later on in the season, but probably not in the way people would expect. But other than that, these things are kind of periphery. They are there, but they're not defining for our main struggles. They just add this further complication to what is already complicated for anybody who's a human.
Yeah, a lot of it, as I've mentioned, is extremely relatable. The discussions about, for example, Trump, that happened later in the season, I've had those discussions with older people from my family. Like, you know what I mean? You don't have to be from a Muslim family to relate to a lot of the conversations that are happening on this show. The overbearing and passive aggressive uncle is like, who doesn't have one of those? Like, and what a treat. And so I was wondering, though, were you inspired at all by your own personal experience? I mean, I guess it's an obvious question. You must be drawing from personal experience to kind of be creating these very unusual characters.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely drawing from, personal experiences. They're not necessarily the experiences of my actual family. I mean, thank God for my real family. When they watch this show, they can tell it's not them, so they can watch it with a clear enough conscience. But yeah, I mean, there's the conversation that we have about Trump in our Egypt episode. We went to Cairo and we were there for a month, and we shot our last two episodes of the season there. But the essence of that conversation was a conversation I had with a cab driver in Cairo in August 2016, and he was kind of, talking to me about, certain feelings he had politically. And then I would hear the sentiment that he had said for the next couple of years echoed throughout different people, and it would always surprise me. And so you kind of, you meet people, and for me, there's just so many people I meet within my community. And what's amazing about my community that I love with Arabs and with Muslims is that they're people of belief. And so when they really believe something, they don't shy away from it. They tell you what they think. And that really just naturally ends up being funny, because people are not trying to be vague about anything. They're pretty defined about what it is that's on their mind, however way it's going. And so it really leads to the palette of the characters that we have in the show really being, set in what they believe. And that kind of revolving around my character, who is trying to figure out his own code and trying to figure out where he kind of falls within all of this.
Yeah. The show is also sometimes quite politically incorrect, which again, I can really appreciate, because some shows perhaps don't want to go there for whatever reason. The uncle, as I mentioned, he's an amazing, funny character, but he's really anti-Semitic. Young Rami shares a meal with Osama bin Laden. There's a lot of little things that could happen in there that maybe some shows wouldn't want to do. And I'm wondering, when you made the show, was there anything in particular that you thought, oh, we might be going too far, but let's just give it a shot anyway?
Yeah, I mean, for the record, the uncle is anti-Semitic. He's also homophobic and racist.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, he definitely is an equal opportunity hater, across the board, and isn't afraid to express it. I think the operating principle for us was to not hide anythanything that felt authentic. And so I think when we say politically incorrect, what we're really saying is something that you would usually hide. Because it might be, the things we show might be politically incorrect, but they are not fabrications. They are not incorrect in terms of being things that exist within the palette of a family. And like you said, it's not just an Arab Muslim family. It's quite algebraic. So, if you have a Jewish family, you have that same uncle. He just says those things about Muslims. If you're part of a white family, you have that same uncle, and he probably doesn't think the KKK was that bad. And you hear the person say that, and the way that ripples in a family when the person's rich and is maybe supporting other people there. And, that's the silence that comes with that says a lot about where we are and why we are where we are. And so, again, for a show that maybe mentions Trump once, that uncle is Trump. That uncle is the person who freewheelingly says things, but continues to exist because of the influence he has financially and monetarily, and how we as communities, even on a small level, continue to hold these people up and not challenge them. And so it was important to introduce him, to introduce other things, and start planting the seeds for the Rami character, so that as we grow this show over a couple of seasons, we can kind of understand, okay, how is he going to deal with this? How are we going to get some clarity on what's going on there, and why is that going on? And so it was important to embrace the format of TV and not necessarily allow that character to get his karma immediately. Because I think there's this natural want of, oh my God, he said something anti-Semitic, he better be in handcuffs by the end of that episode. We want to see justice happen right away, but that's just not real life. It's not how things play out. And so for me as a creator, I'm nervous about every minute of this show before it comes out, and that ends up being a good feeling, I think. And that's something that I talked a lot about with my co-creators, Ari and Ryan and Gerard. We talked a lot about how if we're not feeling nervous about something, then it's probably not the right thing to do. And for me, as being someone who's, really plugged into the Arab Muslim community, I have this, natural feeling of wanting to protect our community because I care about it. But really, as we, made this, and I, conferred with my producers, and we just kind of kept pushing forward and forward. Every time I'd have an idea, it would start with, oh man, I really shouldn't do this, but imagine I did. That would be the thing that I did. We'd have to do it. We'd have to go there because it's important. And so that feeling really comes from, revealing the thing that is usually hidden. And that's probably the only responsibility television has. It's to reveal the hidden, not to be politically correct.
Yeah, 100%. And now that the show's been out for a while, the reaction's been so positive. If you look online at some of the critical response and the reviews and feedback, it's overwhelmingly positive. Firstly, I would have expected it to be a little bit about bringing diversity to TV. That's interesting, but it goes way beyond that. It's, they're calling the show really smart. It's original. It's so funny, and it's actually quite heartbreaking in parts as well. What's it like for you as a creator, as an artist, to be receiving such positive feedback about the show?
I mean, it's really, there's a level of it being overwhelming. It's really, I feel a lot of gratitude. I think, you make something in a bubble for so long, it's kind of shocking when that bubble, gets burst and you release the thing. And for me as a performer too, I mean, I've spent most of my career doing stand-up in rooms for a couple hundred people at most at a time. So the level of exposure and the number of people that it's reaching has been amazing. And it's really cool to feel that critical love. And it's also really cool to feel the criticism that comes from, various communities, because what's happening with the show as well is there's some of the branding of how it comes out in the press of saying, this is an average Muslim family, which is a really tough thing to say, because you would never say it about anything else. You wouldn't say an average Christian family, because it would be like, well, wait, what kind of Christian are they? You wouldn't say an average white family, and so the lumping of it, I think, creates its own dialogue, because most Muslims in America are Black, and then there's a huge subset that are South Asian, and Arabs probably are even smaller. And so, without even looking at the statistics, you just know that there are differences in the way that we're going to be Muslim and the way that things are going to happen. And so there's been a lot of great discourse of people feeling, well, that's not me. And I actually think that that's encouraging for media and for television, because I think it shows we were able to make a first season that I think shows positive encouragement for there to be multiple seasons. We could make 60 of these and it still wouldn't touch as accurately as it could on a Black Muslim's experience, a South Asian Muslim's experience, without them having their own show. A devout Muslim woman who wears a headscarf, she needs her own show. So I think what has been, to your earlier question about like the level of specificity we put into it, I think that actually can hopefully be expansive on an industry level to show that, no, there isn't just one Muslim show. In the same way that I think we started to see that with there isn't just one Black show. I think you can, really tap into that by watching something like our show, because I hope it kind of opens it up. So all the discourse, from the positive reviews to the people wanting more, has all just been really encouraging, because it just means that it's hit an emotional chord.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And let's hope that we get to see more, and good luck with all the awards and accolades coming your way. Thank you so much for your time today, Rami. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for the thoughtful questions. I really appreciate it.
And to all Rami fans, go to goldderby.com right now, make your predictions, and click subscribe to watch all of our chats with amazing contenders just like Rami.